Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Russian government has rejected calls by the European Union, the United States, to release hundreds of people who've been detained following Sunday's anti-government protests. The nationwide demonstrations were the biggest show of defiance since anti-government protests 5 years ago. Now, the man who represents Russia's most vocal opposition to Putin's government is Alexei Navalny. Today, he was jailed for 15 days for resisting police orders, a punishment that will come as little surprise to a man who's endured a year or more of house arrests and several previous detentions. Well, to discuss this a little bit further now, Edward Lucas, author of The New Cold War, Putin's Russia and the Threat to the West. Very nice of you to come, Edward. How important do these protests, first of all, look to you? Is this a significant moment, turning point?
Well, I think they're commendable, and I think that Mr. Navalny and his young supporters, many of whom have known no other Russian leader than Putin, deserve whatever support we can give them. But I have to say, I don't think at the moment they've got the momentum that would be needed either to split the regime or to topple it. Because
of him? I mean, does he seem to you the right revolutionary figure, if such one exists?
Well, I've met him a couple of times. He's a very impressive and forceful character. I think he's not a great unifier, though he has a very strong fan base, but there are other people in the Russian opposition, particularly at the liberal wing, who worry that he's too nationalist. They also worry that maybe he's got some connections somewhere with the regime, that he's been tolerated to some extent and allowed to get away with things where the other people have been closed down. Yet now he is being closed down, and of course he himself is in prison. So I think there's a chance that this escalates and ripples across Russia and turns into something really big. But we did see this movie already 5 years ago with much bigger protests in Moscow, and the regime was able to squash those, and I think they probably can do the same this time round.
But he's been very clever, hasn't he, at redirecting this away from Putin directly, personally, and making it all about corruption, bringing out, you know, for example, the stamps on the notes and stuff to really sell a message here that can have traction with the masses, right?
Yes, I mean, I think that the corruption is the regime's Achilles heel. If you go on about democracy and human rights and freedom and so on, many Russians just look back to the 1990s and think we tried that, then it didn't work. Whereas this grotesque corruption, which involves enormous palaces of hundreds of acres of grounds and ski slopes and duck ponds and things like that, that does really great.
It's always the duck pond at the end that gets them.
Yes, a good tip for rulers would be steer clear of the ducks. But I think that is a weak point, and by going for Medvedev, who's really pretty unpopular, is probably a good tactical move, and I think it's not impossible that Mr. Putin would throw his hapless Prime Minister overboard sometime this year.
So he's no use to him anymore, is that the sense you get?
I think Medvedev was quite useful for Putin a few years ago when Putin wanted to step down as president briefly, and Mr. Medvedev, a very loyal sidekick, kept the seat warm for him in the Kremlin. But they don't really, I mean, he doesn't really like Mr. Medvedev, and I think he wouldn't feel any compunction in throwing him overboard and possibly saying he was shocked to find there'd been corruption going on, and that would, would blunt the edge of public anger if these protests continue, or it may just fizzle out.
You can see the West squirming at these sort of reactions now, the protests, how far to get involved, what they can actually say, do they show support? I mean, the West doesn't really have any power at all here, does it?
Well, I think the West is actually one of the guilty parties here, and this is one of the things Navalny said to me when I asked him, are you anti-Western? He said, of course I'm anti-Western. It's in the West that this regime launders the money that it's stolen from the Russian people. And I think the Scottish paper today has got a splash on the front cover saying that, front page saying that Scottish banks laundered £4 billion of dirty Russian money.
So we do sanctions, but on the other hand...
We do sanctions, which is good, and I wish we did more, but until we really crack down on the bankers and lawyers and accountants who launder these tens of billions of dollars and, you know, cover up the beneficial ownership of companies and so on, they won't take us seriously. And there is a bill going through Parliament right now which would give the government the ability to freeze the assets of human rights abusers. So that's a little glimmer of hope, but we need to do a great deal more.
Lucas, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in.
I've been getting away with it all.